This is North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is West Fargo Republican Representative Kim Koppelman. He chairs the House Judiciary Committee, which has a pretty good workload, I would say.
Indeed.
So, Representative Koppelman, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to be with you.
So, first off, you became Judiciary Chairman how?
Well, I've served on the Judiciary Committee my entire legislative tenure, with the exception of 4 years, 2 sessions when I was on the Appropriations Committee. Other than that, I've served on Judiciary the entire time. I also was chairman of the Constitutional Revision Committee for several sessions, and that committee, this session, was merged into the Judiciary Committee. So the committee now has both responsibilities of both previous committees. Representative Dwayne DeCray was the longtime chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he was not elected this time. He was a part of a primary where 3 incumbent legislators were thrown into a primary race for 2 seats, and he sort of became the odd man out. So we miss Representative DeCray. He did a great job, but he's now an official with the Fish and Wildlife Service, or Fish and Game Service, I should say. Game and Fish, to get that straight, and is doing a fine job there.
But now that you've got the 2 committees merged, you've
Yes.
got a lot of work ahead of you.
We really do. We've had 71 bills and resolutions assigned to us, and I think I haven't checked, I think that's the high water mark. I think we have more than any other committee in the House at this point.
So, in the issues before your committee, what would you say are the top 2 or 3?
Well, I think probably the top issue, certainly in terms of volume, in terms of the number of bills we've seen on it, probably relate to guns and Second Amendment rights. And we've passed some of those out of the committee, some remain to be acted upon.
Now, the bills that you have, I think almost without exception, all talk about gun rights and not gun control, correct?
That's true, and it's very interesting because as you look around the country, particularly in the wake of tragedies like the Gabby Giffords shooting, the tragedy in Connecticut, the school shooting that most of the country was just horrified over, there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction, I guess I would classify it that way, and I think most of my colleagues would as well, around the country for gun control. And I think it speaks very well of North Dakota that the bills we're considering in the Judiciary Committee all have to do with guaranteeing Second Amendment rights, not infringing upon them. There were 2 bills introduced that would have been, I think, considered gun control bills, but they were promptly withdrawn.
So, you mentioned there was a knee-jerk reaction around the country. Is some of this in North Dakota also a reaction to some of the demands now from Washington, or the calls for gun control?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and certainly that allegation has been made, and nothing happens in a vacuum. So I suppose every time there are major issues that come across the prairie, whether it's from Washington, D.C. or around the state of North Dakota, our legislators listen to the people back home, and many of us share those. Obviously, hopefully most of the legislators share the views of those who elected them and represent those views. And so North Dakota is a state that has long prized the right to keep and bear arms, as our Constitution guarantees. And I think when legislators introduce bills to restate that or state it in different ways and ensure it, that's just reflective of the concerns people have.
One of the more controversial bills, I don't think your name was on the bill, but I think it was Representative Striley.
Yes.
Had introduced the bill that basically would say to North Dakota law enforcement, you cannot enforce any federal gun laws.
Right.
I understand that there's been a lot of discussion about that. And what's the status of that bill?
The status of that bill, as well as most of the other gun bills, is that they're still in committee, and we're going to be acting upon them. The only reason we haven't is that we felt we wanted to take them up together since some overlap, there are some similarities, and we need to decide how to pass those out of committee. We don't want to duplicate, of course, and we want to weigh one against the other to see what actually they're doing. The bill you're talking about, as I recall, deals with, as you said, federal gun laws, and I think it's federal gun laws introduced or passed going forward, not the ones that currently exist.
That's right.
And so, again, you could attribute that to some concern or fear about what the federal government may do. And it basically says that law enforcement within the state of North Dakota cannot enforce those. It was taken, I think, by law enforcement initially as an affront to them. And I don't think that was the way Representative Striley intended it. In fact, he has told me, and law enforcement officials that have spoken to him have told me, that he's been very good to work with, that they are now, while I don't know that they all support the bill, they are now at least satisfied that that was not his intent. And he did offer some amendments to the committee to soften it in terms of some of the concerns that were there. So what the committee will do with those remains to be seen.
So is there going to be kind of like a policy direction for the whole gun issue out of the North Dakota legislature?
Well, I believe so. I think, again, we have been a state that long has prized the right to keep and bear arms, and a lot of people jump to the conclusion that that means hunting. Well, certainly that's hunting and fishing are even constitutional issues in North Dakota, as you might know. So that's another area that we really hold dear. But I think a lot of people, especially today, are reasserting the point that the Second Amendment really has nothing to do with hunting. It's about the constitutional right to keep and bear arms, oftentimes for personal protection, and our founders believed to avoid a tyrannical government. So I think North Dakotans believe that, and I think we're going to be seeing bills that would kind of reassert that, and in some cases maybe change some of our public policy to underscore it.
Now, another issue that is coming up, and it comes up all the time, but there seems to be a number of bills dealing with the abortion issue this time.
Yes.
Your committee has heard some of them?
Actually, Dave, I don't think we've had any of the abortion bills. They've gone to Human Services, I believe, in the House. I'm not sure which committee has heard them in the Senate. It might be the Senate Judiciary Committee that's heard some.
Okay, so you haven't.
We have not.
And you may not wade into it, although there is a constitutional amendment that has passed the Senate and will come to the House. So
we probably will.
You'll probably
we'll
get that
see.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's the personhood bill.
Yes. Yes.
How do you see that issue kind of playing itself out in this session? Number one, because of the number of bills. Number two, because of the influence, or I wouldn't say influence, but maybe some of the out-of-state groups like Personhood USA are getting involved in that. Mm-hmm. And some of the sponsors are saying this will make North Dakota a test case to try to overturn Roe versus Wade.
Well, I can't comment intelligently on that resolution or the bills that the Senate has passed because I really haven't read them, to be honest with you. We have, as you well know, 800 to 1,000 bills every legislative session, and with our committee, we have two committees, each of us, that we serve on, and with the one committee I chair having 71 bills, we're plenty busy wading through all of those. Certainly before we vote on it, we'll all be making ourselves more familiar with what each bill says. So I'm not familiar specifically with the activities of some of the out-of-state groups. Certainly North Dakota, I think historically, I've been in the legislature for 18 years, and I think it's fair to say that we have always gone on record as being a pro-life state. The question of how that translates into policy specifically and what bills are passed and which ones aren't, is a matter of every legislative session.
So that's kind of evolving as it goes on.
It really is.
So. Mm-hmm. Then let me just go to your other committee. Your
Sure.
other committee is Government Veterans.
Political subdivisions.
Political subdivisions.
Yes.
So do you get some of the election bills?
We do indeed. And they're kind of split. Years ago, it seemed that political subdivisions got almost all of the election bills. Then there was a period for a few years that they seemed to go to GVA, Government and Veterans Affairs, more often. And I think this session it's been sort of a mixed bag.
One of the bills that has garnered some controversy now is the bill that would require an ID. Mm-hmm. for voting. Mm-hmm. And there's always been a kind of an ID requirement in North Dakota, not always, but
sure.
Past several elections, but this one kind of strengthens that. And you talked about it a little bit on the floor when it was up for floor amendment. Mm-hmm. It's not back to the floor for final vote. It has to go to appropriations because there's a fiscal note that has to be attached to it. Mm-hmm. Where do you come down on that whole idea about voter ID?
Well, I think guaranteeing the integrity of the polling place and of the ballot box is critically important to our representative form of government, to our system of democracy, small d democracy, allowing people to vote. In North Dakota, we're an initiative and referendum state, so people vote on issues sometimes as well as on candidates to represent them. And I think ensuring that people are allowed the broadest access to vote is very important, and then ensuring that when they go to vote, that every vote is counted, every legitimate vote is counted, and that it's only counted once is really what we're all after. So how we get at that is what many of the bills try to grapple with.
Is there any evidence that you've seen of potential voter misconduct or voter fraud?
We don't know. And I think that's the scary statement in North Dakota, to be honest. We are I think the people of North Dakota have high integrity. I certainly am not accusing anyone or suspecting anyone of any kind of voter intimidation or voter fraud or anything like that. But as you pointed out-of-state groups get involved in North Dakota on a lot of issues, so we don't really know where that goes. In the last election, there were over 10,000 affidavits filed by North Dakota voters, and when circumstance that spurs the filling out of an affidavit at the polling place is when someone comes to vote on election day and has no identification. And the process we have now says, well, fill this affidavit out, sign it, saying you are who you say you are, you live where you say you live, and here's your ballot, you can vote. So with over 10,000 people doing that, we have no way of knowing if they're all legitimate voters or not.
So I have to say, full disclosure, I did not have to fill out an affidavit, but I moved.
Okay?
So I moved, and my driver's license was getting ready to expire, so I didn't want to go get
Sure,
another driver's
sure.
license. So when I went to the polling place, I took a utility bill.
Yeah.
And that was
Yes.
enough because it showed my address.
Exactly.
So you just want some kind of proof of address.
That's
nothing
right.
else.
In North Dakota, the requirement to vote is that you are of legal age to vote and that you have lived here lived at your address for more than 30 days to prove that you're eligible to vote at that particular polling place. And you know, historically in North Dakota, the way that has worked is that everybody kind of knows everybody, especially if not in a community, especially in a neighborhood or a polling place or a township or county or wherever it is. So you'd come to the polls and they'd smile and say, "Hi, Dave, how are you today?" And they'd hand you your ballot. And you know, that's kind of the North Dakota we all grew up with and we all know and love. But times are changing. You know, I live in a metropolitan area that I represent West Fargo, and you know, the West Fargo area, Moorhead, Minnesota, across the river, I think is over 200,000 people now in those two counties. And so not everyone does know everyone anymore. And I think it's important for the people in North Dakota to know that when they go to the polls that their vote is counted and that it's not canceled out, perhaps by someone who has no right to vote there.
But you make a good point about the state of North Dakota is changing. Part of it is being driven by a great economy and of course the oil boom. And
Yes.
But it's beyond the oil boom. So you're seeing new people in a Fargo, a West Fargo, a Moorhead, a Bismarck, a Williston. So people are moving here, and I can understand some of the concerns about their addresses.
Sure, absolutely. And you know, North Dakota is also the only state in the nation without voter registration. And we've had bills over the years to implement voter registration. I've always opposed them because I think some baggage goes with that, some bureaucracy goes with that perhaps we don't need here. But we all, I think, share the goal of making sure that the integrity of the polling place and of the election process is secured.
Well, I want to go back to something that you said, and we talked a little bit about out-of-state groups. And
Sure.
Another issue that's coming up is also voting related, and that's the initiative and referendum process.
Indeed.
And with the two measures that did not make it on the ballot because of people forging signatures, there are bills to, you know, toughen that law, and there are also bills to change some of the signature requirements. Has your committee dealt with some of those?
Actually, the Political Subdivisions Committee did deal with one of those just today, and we're taping this on Thursday. Your viewers will see it a little bit later, but the bill that we had before us was supported by the Secretary of State, and I think a lot of people are, again, concerned about the integrity of that process. There are several voting-related violations in law that are misdemeanors, and a couple of them have been made felonies. The bill sought to make forging someone's signature on a petition a felony offense. I actually brought an amendment into the committee on that bill, and we did two things. One is we created a higher threshold for that level by saying if you forged more than two names on a ballot, that it would be a felony. If you forged one or two, it would remain a misdemeanor. And the concern about that was most of the other offenses in that statute that deal with voting-related offenses are individual. If you go vote purposely in the wrong polling place, or you try to do something else that's you know, illegal, but it only involves you and your vote, that's a misdemeanor. If it's something more serious, where you could actually have an impact on an initiated measure or an entire election, then it's a felony. And in doing that, my amendment also created a felony status for the other types of mischief that could literally throw an election, like stuffing ballot boxes or falsifying official election reports and those types of things. That just went out of committee today with a due pass recommendation and will be coming to the floor.
So, and of course, there is some constitutional changes on the initiated referendum measures.
Yes.
I wanted to get your reaction to this one because it was born, I think, of the Home Measure 2 debate and talking to Senator David Hogue from Minot, who sponsored it. And the measure would say that if there's a fiscal impact and it passes, then the legislature has to review it. And if 40% of both houses, each house, votes for it, then it would go into law. I found that a very interesting concept You haven't seen that yet. I don't know if
not.
it's gotten out of the Senate, but that's one of the things that's proposed. So there is a lot of concern about what happened in the initiated measures and also the referendums in this past election cycle.
I've not seen it yet. As you point out, it's in the Senate. Senator Hogue chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. I chair the House Judiciary Committee. So I would imagine we'll be interacting quite a bit in the remainder of the session. We haven't done much but see each other in the hall so far and say hello. But as issues like that go from one chamber to the other, as we get into the conference committees and so on, we'll be interacting quite a bit. And I really don't want to give any initial opinion without actually seeing the measure and sitting through the hearing on it and so on. But I do think that, again, the concern with initiated measures, we want to make very sure that we preserve the right of initiative and referendum in North Dakota. That's a long-held privilege that the voters, the people of our state have. Not all states have it, but many of the western states do, including North Dakota. We want to ensure that that continues, and we also want to ensure that that process has integrity as well. So I think that's probably what's prompting a lot of what you're seeing, and whether they're good ideas or not is what we'll sort out.
I wanted to go to a bill that you authored that got the Attorney General and the Governor behind it, and that's the DUI, toughening the DUI standards. Did that go to your committee?
It did.
Judiciary?
It did.
And was that kicked out?
It was. We amended the bill. The Judiciary Committee amended the bill, went to a subcommittee that studied it and looked at a lot of aspects. And with the amendment, it was voted out with a unanimous do pass recommendation. And it also went to the Appropriations Committee now because there is a fiscal note on the bill.
Okay. What was the amendment to the bill? First off, let's talk about
Sure.
it. It did toughen up
Indeed.
the fines.
Yes.
It toughened up suspensions,
Yes.
and it also required some jail time for a
Right.
first-time offender.
Right, exactly. And I think it's important to point out that when we talk about toughening up, for the first offense, it didn't change the criminal penalty at all. It's a Class B misdemeanor now. It's a Class B misdemeanor in the bill. The only thing it did do was it did increase the fines, and it also called for some jail time. You can sentence someone now to 30 days in jail for a DUI. However, with this bill, it would provide for some mandatory jail time. Now, one of the major things that the amendment did, and I support this, is that rather than just any first-time offender, it looks at blood alcohol level. And if your blood alcohol level is between 0.08, which is the legal limit, the current threshold with which you can be charged for a DUI, and 0.15, not much would change except that the fine would be higher. And but if you are at 1.5 or more, or excuse me, 0.15 or more, under the amended bill, it would require some mandatory jail time, short period of time, I think it's 4 days, and it's triple the fine that currently exists. Between 0.08 and 0.15, it would double the fine.
Is that being driven by somebody who gets picked up at 0.15 or higher may have done that before?
Well, I don't know if that's it as much as I think everyone we talk to, from citizens to law enforcement to everyone else, would agree that 0.15 is a more seriously impaired level. Now, you can have a debate about 0.08, and we've had that in the legislature before. Every state has now gone to it because it's one of those things that the federal government threatens to withhold highway funds if you don't do. And but there was a lot of debate. Whether I think it used to be 0.1 and now it's 0.08, and there was a lot of debate about when are you really intoxicated, when are you really basically in a condition where you're impaired when you drive. And so I think one of the concerns was that if someone has a little bit to drink and is not really impaired, that they shouldn't go into jail and so on. And that's where the discussion went. And that's a debate that we'll continue to have on the House floor. But I believe that the amendments are good, they're solid, and that it's a better bill as a result. The other thing and there's also a study as part of the amendment that we would look at this issue over time. And so over the next couple of years, we'd watch how these laws, if they're implemented, change the process and affect things. I want to point out a couple of things. Well, first one about the bill. The 24/7 program, I think, is very, very, very important. The Attorney General has developed this, worked hard on it. He's worked with folks from South Dakota and some other neighboring states. And it differs from things like ignition interlocks and other approaches in that and even from suspended licenses, because now, frankly, if you suspend someone's driver's license for a DUI, most of the time in North Dakota, they continue to drive. And then they get stopped and they've had a suspended license, so that's another criminal charge, and it just kind of mounts up. Because in our state, people make the point you have to, in a lot of cases, you have to drive to work and do other things. Sometimes they're restricted licenses and so on. 24/7 says, while you're on a suspended sentence after being picked up for a DUI, during that term, you'll be on the 24/7 program, which means you'll go in twice a day and have a breath test, morning and night. And if you blow that you've been drinking, you'll go back to jail. If you haven't, you're fine. And so obviously if you don't drink, you're not going to drink and drive. And the other piece that I think is very important is we need to change our culture in North Dakota. No single law change solves this problem. But changing the law, getting tougher, can be part of the puzzle, just a piece of the puzzle, but it takes you and I and everyone else to really think about this, think about the people that have been killed and maimed. The problem now, Dave, is that the response to a DUI in North Dakota, frankly, way too often is a wink and a nod or a sigh of relief, gee, I'm glad it wasn't me that got caught, and we sort of slap people on the wrist, and then we're horrified when a drunk driver kills someone. Well, those dots don't connect. We need to say from the get-go, we're serious about this, and we want to help people remember not to drink and drive.
For the repeat drunk driving offender,
Yes.
your penalties go up further, right?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And we think that's important because oftentimes we want to get people's attention on the first offense. Sometimes there are statistics about how many people reoffend and all that, but I know this. Every repeat offender was a first-time offender. And so if we can get their attention initially, that's great. But we feel that the repeat offenders particularly are an increasing danger on the highways, and we need to get more serious when they continue to have a string of DUIs.
So there will be policy coming from the North Dakota legislature, perhaps your bill, that will say, okay, we can't tolerate this anymore.
Well, I hope so. It's up to the legislature to vote on those, but my hope is that we do get more serious, and we're not trying to penalize anyone. We're just trying to say this is a serious thing. People are being killed. A family from my district was hit head-on by a drunk driver who was driving the wrong way on the interstate highway, and assuming both cars were going the speed limit, that's 75 miles an hour two ways, that's 150 miles an hour of impact. That's pretty serious, coming over a little crest, a little hill. And a young family and their daughter and their unborn child were all killed, as was the drunk driver. So this is something that we really need to get serious about in North Dakota. And I might point out, when I say cultural, that particular accident, I don't know that a law would have changed it, to be honest, because when I look at the facts of that case, it was a repeat offender. I think there are probably only about three things that would have made a difference. One is a bartender saying, you know what, you've had enough, I'm not going to serve you anymore. Another is someone in that bar saying, friend, I'm going to take your keys, and I will call family or friends to give you a ride home. I'll give you a ride home myself if you'd like, but you're not going to drive. Or someone, if either of those failed, calling the police or the sheriff or the highway patrol and saying someone is getting behind the wheel that shouldn't be. That's just not our culture in North Dakota, but that's where we need to be because that's what will save lives.
We have just a couple of minutes
Sure.
left. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you,
Of
because
course.
it affects everything in the legislature that's money-wise. The new revenue forecast came out
Yes.
this week. Some revenue is up for the current biennium, which ends on June 30th. A little bit down for the next biennium. Talking to the appropriators is not too concerned about it. Have you looked at the numbers? Are you concerned at all?
I have not looked at the numbers. I've heard generalizations about where we are. I'm not concerned because I think the economy in North Dakota, it's obviously the healthiest in the nation. Whether the boom will continue at the level it is the question, not whether we'll continue to grow and prosper. But I think we need to always look at those dollars, and frankly, when things are good, when there is a lot of money, for every dollar that's there in state coffers, there are 10 hands out saying that belongs to me. Please fund my program. Please give it to me. So we need to be cautious about our spending.
And we heard that today talking to the majority leader. He says, yes, we're upside down, but that's almost de rigueur as you get into crossover, because
Exactly.
things need to be weeded out in the other house.
Exactly true. Stay tuned, because all of those things, my 4 years on appropriations taught me that budgets are in a state of flux during the session, and as you get closer to the end, that those numbers really get crunched, and we realize what we can afford to spend and what we can't.
So I have to ask you, what advice did you have for your son when he was elected Representative Ben Koppelman?
Yes, well, it's what a privilege. It's a rare honor to be able to serve with your son, something I never expected to happen. I didn't know he had that kind of interest when the opportunity availed itself. He has been on the school board for 4 years. He's been on the state electrical board, was president of the West Fargo School Board until June of this year when his term expired, and he decided not to run again and instead to run for a legislative seat in a new district that was created. My advice, I think, is that he remember that who he's elected by, that he represents the people of his district and the people of his state, and that they trust his judgment, but that they also that he also needs to listen to them because they're the folks that he's there to be the voice of. And it's just an honor to be able to serve together. And again, I don't think that happens very often. Interesting, he was asked to run 10 years ago. He's 33 years old, he was 23 at that time. And there was a new legislative district created then too that he happened to live in. And he asked my advice, and I said, well, if you're asking me as a legislator or as a party person, I would say run. We need you there, you'll do a good job. If you're asking me as a dad, he had been married a year or two and he had a young family at the time, a young daughter just born. I said, you need to be home, you need to be a dad. And 10 years later, the timing is better. It's a privilege to be there with him.
Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Good to be with you.
Our guest today on Legislative Review, West Fargo Representative Kim Koppelman, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson.